Sometimes in a television studio, 50 years of silence shatters in seconds, and no one, not even Dr. Phil, knows what to say. The cameras were rolling. The audience was watching. And then Dr. Phil did something he almost never does. He stopped. Completely. The tape froze. His hand went up. "Hold on," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just hold on." On stage, two elderly men, brothers who hadn't seen each other in half a century, were about to speak the words that would change everything. What happened next became one of the most powerful moments in television history. It started 3 weeks earlier when a woman named Linda called the Dr. Phil show. Her voice was shaking on the phone. "My father is dying," she said. "And he has one regret that's eating him alive. He needs to see his brother before it's too late." The producers listened. This wasn't unusual. Families reached out all the time hoping Dr. Phil could help heal old wounds. But as Linda told the story, something about it struck them differently. "They haven't spoken in 50 years, Linda explained. "Not a single word. Not at weddings, not at funerals, not even when our grandmother was dying. 50 years of complete silence." The producers knew immediately. This was something Dr. Phil needed to hear. Within days, the team had reached out to both brothers. James, 78, living in a small town in Ohio, agreed to come to the studio. Robert, 76, living alone in Arizona, said yes without hesitation. Neither knew the other had agreed. Neither knew they'd be in the same room for the first time since 1974. The day of the taping arrived. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage as he always did, confident, prepared, ready to guide the conversation. The audience settled into their seats. The cameras began rolling. "Today," Dr. Phil began, "we're talking about family estrangement. About what happens when the people who are supposed to love us become strangers." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "And about whether it's ever too late to heal." But Dr. Phil didn't know what was waiting for him backstage. James was brought out first. He walked slowly, using a cane, his hands trembling slightly. At 78, he looked every bit his age, gray hair, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much pain. He sat down in the chair across from Dr. Phil. "James, Dr. Phil said gently, "tell me about your brother." James took a breath. "Robert," he said, and just saying the name seemed to hurt. "We were best friends. Growing up, we did everything together. We shared a room, we played baseball, we protected each other." "So what happened?" Dr. Phil asked. James looked down at his hands. 1974. February. "There was an accident." His voice cracked. "And I blamed him. I blamed him for something that wasn't his fault, and I never forgave him." The studio was absolutely silent. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "What was the accident?" James closed his eyes. "Our little sister, Emma. She was 16. Robert was supposed to drive her to a friend's house that night, but he had to work late. So I told her to take the bus. And the bus." His voice broke completely. "The bus crashed. She died instantly." The audience gasped. Dr. Phil's expression shifted. This wasn't just estrangement. This was grief that had calcified into 50 years of silence. "And you blamed Robert," Dr. Phil said softly. "I told him it was his fault," James whispered. "I told him if he had just driven her, she'd still be alive. And then I never spoke to him again." Tears were streaming down his face now. 50 years, Dr. Phil. 50 years I've carried this anger. And now I'm dying. Stage 4 cancer. 6 months, maybe less. Dr. Phil paused. Something in his expression changed. "James," he said carefully, "do you want to see your brother?" James nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Phil looked toward the wings, then at his producers. He made a decision that went against every protocol, every pre-planned segment structure. "Stop the tape," he said. The cameras kept rolling, but the crew froze. This never happened. Dr. Phil never stopped mid-show. Robert is here, Dr. Phil said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. He's been backstage this entire time. He doesn't know you're dying. He doesn't know this is happening. But if I bring him out right now, are you ready? James looked up, his face a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Yes. He managed. Please. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil stood up and walked toward the wings. The audience could hear him speaking to someone off camera. Bring him out. Now. The seconds felt like hours. The audience held their breath. And then, from stage right, an elderly man appeared. Robert was smaller than James, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes searching the stage until they landed on his brother. And then he stopped. Completely frozen. For a moment, nobody moved. 50 years compressed into a single instant. Dr. Phil stepped back, letting the brothers see each other without interference. James tried to stand but couldn't quite manage it. Robert took one step forward, then another, his hand reaching out instinctively. Jimmy? Robert's voice was barely audible. Bobby, James whispered back. And then the dam broke. Robert rushed forward, faster than anyone expected a 76-year-old man could move, and fell to his knees in front of his brother's chair. James reached down, pulling Robert up into an embrace that 50 years of silence made desperate and urgent and absolutely necessary. The studio erupted. The audience stood. People were crying openly. Camera operators wiped their eyes. Even the seasoned producers in the control room were reaching for tissues. And Dr. Phil stood there, completely still, watching something he'd never seen in 30 years of television. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 90 seconds, the brothers pulled apart slightly, still holding each other's arms, unable to let go. I'm sorry, James said over and over. I'm so sorry. It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. I should have driven her, Robert said, tears pouring down his face. I should have been there. No, James said firmly, pulling back to look his brother in the eyes. No. It was an accident. Just an accident. And I wasted 50 years blaming you for something that was nobody's fault. Dr. Phil finally moved, walking slowly to where a small table had been placed. On it was a manila envelope, weathered, clearly old. He picked it up carefully. James, Dr. Phil said softly. Your daughter Linda gave this to us. She said you've carried it every day for the last 50 years but never opened it. James looked at the envelope and fresh tears came. Emma's last letter, he said. She wrote it the morning she died. Mom gave it to me at the funeral, but I couldn't. I've never been able to. Dr. Phil held the envelope carefully, like the sacred object it was. Would you like to open it now? He asked gently. With Robert here? James looked at his brother. Robert nodded, reaching out to take James's hand. Together, they took the envelope from Dr. Phil. The studio was absolutely silent as James's trembling fingers opened the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. He unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the words, and his face transformed. She knew, he whispered. She knew Bobby had to work. She wrote. Bobby said he'd make it up to me this weekend. He's the best big brother. Tell him I'm not mad. Robert made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She wasn't mad, he repeated, as if he couldn't quite believe it. She wasn't mad. James confirmed, his voice breaking. And neither am I. Not anymore. The brothers held each other again, the letter pressed between them. Dr. Phil turned to the camera. And for once, he didn't have his usual certainty. His eyes were wet. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with emotion. I've been doing this for a long time, he said. I've seen families heal. I've seen people forgive the unforgivable. But I've never seen anything quite like this. He paused, looking back at the brothers, who were still holding each other, still crying, still making up for 50 years in a matter of minutes. Grief makes us do things we can't take back, Dr. Phil continued. It makes us lash out. It makes us blame. It makes us push away the people we need most. And sometimes, if we're not careful, it costs us decades we can never get back. But Dr. Phil wasn't finished. Something off camera had caught his attention. He gestured to his team, and a moment later several people appeared from the wings. Linda, James's daughter, along with her children. Robert's son and his family. Grandchildren who had never met their great-uncles. An entire family tree that had been split in half for 50 years. You're not just healing yourselves, Dr. Phil said, as the families merged on stage in a massive, tearful group hug. You're healing everyone who came after you. Every person who grew up thinking family meant division instead of unity. The cameras captured it all. The moment when separation became connection, when silence became reunion, when decades of pain began, finally, to transform into something like peace. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the taping ended, Dr. Phil did something else unusual. He asked the brothers to stay. Off camera, away from the audience, the three of them sat together in Dr. Phil's private office. I want you to know, Dr. Phil said to James. We've arranged for you to have support. Medical support, hospice care, whatever you need. And Robert. He turned to the younger brother. We've arranged for you to be able to stay near James for as long as he has. Robert grabbed Dr. Phil's hand. Thank you, he said, his voice raw. Thank you for giving us this. James pulled something from his pocket, a small, tarnished bracelet. Emma wore this, he said, pressing it into Robert's hand. I want you to have it. I want you to remember that she loved you. That she never blamed you. Robert closed his fingers around the bracelet, and it was like watching 50 years of weight fall away. In the weeks that followed, the brothers made up for lost time. Robert moved into the guest room at James's house. They sat together every day, talking about everything. Their childhood, their parents, Emma, the families they'd built and parallel lives that should have intersected. Linda sent updates to Dr. Phil's team. Photos of her father and uncle laughing together. Videos of them looking through old family albums. Messages of gratitude from family members who finally felt complete. James lived 4 months longer than his doctors predicted. Robert was with him every single day. And when James finally passed, peacefully in his sleep, he was holding two things, Robert's hand and Emma's letter. The funeral brought together a family that hadn't been whole in half a century. Dr. Phil attended, standing quietly in the back. He watched as Robert delivered the eulogy, speaking about forgiveness and wasted time and the gift of those final months. He watched as cousins who'd never met embraced. He watched as a family knitted itself back together, one conversation at a time. After the service, Robert approached Dr. Phil. He was wearing Emma's bracelet. He waited until the very end to tell me something, Robert said. He told me that sitting in your studio, seeing me walk out from backstage, was the first time in 50 years he felt like himself again. Like the person he was before the anger. Dr. Phil nodded, his own eyes misty. That's what healing looks like, he said. It's not pretty. It's not easy. But when it happens, it changes everything. Years later, Dr. Phil would say that episode changed him too. In interviews, he'd reference it. The brothers, he'd call it, and everyone who'd been there would know exactly what he meant. It became a touchstone, a reminder that some pain runs so deep that conventional therapy can't reach it. Sometimes, all you can do is create a space for people to be human again. The manila envelope, Emma's letter inside, was framed and given to Robert. He kept it in his living room, next to a photo of all three siblings taken in 1972, 2 years before everything shattered. And every time he looked at it, he'd remember what his brother said in those final days. I forgave you 50 years too late, but I'm so grateful I didn't wait 51. That's the legacy of that day in Dr. Phil's studio. Not just a story about two brothers who found each other again, but a reminder that it's never too late to heal. It's never too late to say sorry. It's never too late to love the people who share your blood, your history, your irreplaceable, unrepeatable past. Emma's bracelet became a family heirloom, passed down through Robert's line with a note attached. This represents second chances. Never waste them. And somewhere in television archives, there's footage of the moment Dr. Phil froze, the moment he realized he wasn't just hosting a show, he was witnessing a miracle. The moment 50 years of silence broke. The moment two brothers came home to each other. Because some stories don't need endings. They need witnesses. And on that day, everyone in that studio, Dr. Phil included, witnessed something that reminded them what family really means. The impact of that episode rippled far beyond the studio walls. Within hours of airing, the Dr. Phil hotline was flooded with calls from families experiencing similar estrangements. Siblings who hadn't spoken in decades reached out to each other. Parents called children they'd written off years ago. The episode became a catalyst for thousands of private reconciliations that would never make television, but were no less profound. Dr. Phil established a special resource page on his website dedicated to family estrangement, featuring therapists specializing in grief and reconciliation. The page included Emma's story, with the family's permission, as a testament to the cost of unresolved pain and the possibility of healing. Robert lived another 8 years after James passed. He spent those years traveling to visit family members he'd been cut off from, rebuilding bridges one conversation at a time. He often spoke at grief support groups, always wearing Emma's bracelet, sharing the lesson his brother taught him. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding that love is more powerful than pain. On what would have been James's 85th birthday, the entire family, now spanning 4 generations, gathered at Emma's grave. Robert placed flowers there, along with a photo from that day in Dr. Phil's studio. 2 elderly men, embracing for the first time in 50 years, both crying, both finally free. The photo became iconic in family therapy circles, used in training programs as an example of breakthrough moments and the human capacity for healing even after decades of pain.